Under the scorching sun, people in a massive crowd suffered from dehydration and desperately searched for any water source. But for miles around, there was no drinking fountain in sight to quench their thirst. People were passing out from heat stroke and exhaustion, yet hundreds still wanted to climb over the fence just to get into the closed-off area. Each of them was eager to ride the constantly breaking down attractions. This day is known as Black Sunday, the catastrophic opening day of the world's first Disneyland in California. But this was far from the worst day in the most famous amusement park. Visitors trust Disneyland with their lives, believing in its safety. However, in this park of amusements, people were getting injured, losing their lives and their loved ones. So is Disneyland really a place of fun? That notorious Black Sunday happened in 1955 in Anaheim, California. Today, it's a full-fledged Disneyland resort with 2 amusement parks. But near Orlando, there's a Disney World twice as big, with 4 separate parks, hotels, and even its own railroad. In 2022, these 2 Disneylands were visited by over 60 million people. For most, it's the happiest place on Earth, but for some, it's been their worst nightmare, shattering their lives. When in September of 2000, parents told their sons, Nicholas and Brandon Zucker, that the whole family was going to Disneyland, the boys couldn't contain their excitement, especially the younger one, Brandon, who wore his favorite ear hat with Mickey Mouse for the occasion. The family spent the entire day at the amusement park, creating some of the happiest moments in the boys' lives. However, when they went to the last attraction before heading home, everything changed. The Zuckers chose to take a ride in the world of Roger Rabbit. The children and their mother sat in the first yellow taxi car, while the father and the grandparents took the second one. The train was speeding through the tunnels and spinning unpredictably when suddenly the father saw Brandon fall out of the taxi. While other passengers tried to understand what was happening, the father jumped out of his car in an attempt to stop the ride. However, the train continued for about 3 meters before the operator turned it off. To the horror of the family, they saw the taxi had run over Brandon, pinning him to the floor. The boy had lost consciousness and was not moving. The shocked father informed the ride operator about the tragedy, and together, they rushed to help Brandon. But within 4 minutes, rescuers arrived. They managed to get the boy out from under the car, but he wasn't breathing. Paramedics fought desperately for the child's life, hoping for a miracle, and eventually, Brandon's heart started beating again. Disneyland representatives reassured the public that, despite the tragedy, their staff's actions were similar to a well-oiled machine. However, witnesses claimed it was not entirely true. When Brandon's father approached the ride operator, the park employee briefly left with him, but soon returned without doing anything. The operator seemed unresponsive to pleas for help, even forbidding onlookers from entering the attraction. Only when Brandon's father returned a 3rd time did about 10 people rush to help the child. Another witness said that Disneyland took too long to notify rescuers about the accident. Regardless, the 4-year-old boy didn't regain consciousness and couldn't breathe on his own. He was taken to the hospital, where he underwent a 2-hour surgery. It turned out that Brandon suffered severe internal injuries and brain damage. Nevertheless, he survived. Devastated parents had to wait for a month until their son was taken out of a medically induced coma. When Brandon finally opened his eyes after the horrific accident, his family breathed a sigh of relief. Little did they know the shocking truth: Brandon would never walk or speak again. For over 8 years, he battled in hospitals, fighting for every day of his life. Unfortunately, his battle came to an end in January of 2009 at the age of 13. Despite the Zuckers' legal victory against Disneyland for the expensive medical treatment, it didn't alleviate Brandon's suffering or save his life. Investigations revealed that the tragedy occurred due to poor attachment of the safety bar on Brandon's seat, and the attraction's cars lacked shields to prevent the child from falling under the taxi. Such horrifying incidents were happening in Disneyland far too often to be ignored, though it remains unclear whether the park itself shares this viewpoint. In early January of 1984, Dolly Young spent the day with her friends at Disneyland. At lunchtime, the gang decided to hit the Matterhorn Bobsleds, a popular American roller coaster where trains zoomed through tunnels and twisted turns at about 43.5 kilometers per hour. 2 trains simultaneously ran on different tracks, often passing each other. Dolly Young got on a bobsled by herself, and the ride attendant double-checked if all passengers were securely buckled up. as per the rules. The trains dashed through the artificial mountain, causing passengers to scream in excitement. But just a few minutes after the ride started, different screams echoed through the tunnels. Simultaneously, the ride operator noticed that one bobsled was stuck. He immediately shut down the coaster and went to investigate, unprepared for what he would find. In one of the bobsleds, a horrified man sat, hugging his daughters, instructing them not to open their eyes. Beside them, on the tracks, the headless body of Dolly Young lay. People were evacuated, and medics confirmed that the woman had died instantly. It was evident that Young had fallen from her seat, but her safety restraint was found on a neighboring seat. Since the ride attendants had checked the passengers' restraints before the ride began, Young most likely unfastened her restraints after the ride started. However, it remained unknown why and how Young ended up on the tracks. Her death was deemed an accident, and the very next day, after this horrific tragedy, the attraction resumed its regular operation. Furthermore, they even put the bobsled that Dolly Young was in back on the track. It was only the bobsled that had run over her that was sent for further testing. However, it turned out that this wasn't the first death on this attraction. Exactly 20 years before Young's death, a 15-year-old boy, Mark Maples, fell from a bobsled and passed away 4 days later from his injuries. In both cases, Disneyland insisted that the tragedies were due to the passengers' negligence. Yet on September 5, 2003, an incident occurred that would forever stain the park's reputation. On that day, best friends Marcelo and Vincent, along with 2 other buddies, arrived early in the morning at California's Disneyland. They went on several high-speed rides and decided to take a break on the park's gentlest roller coaster, suitable for all ages, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. It reached a speed of 58 kilometers per hour, without loops or high drops. Out of the 5 available train cars, Marcelo and Vincent chose the first one, right behind the decorative locomotive. They were having a good time and planning their next move when they heard strange sounds about a third of the way into the ride. The locomotive suddenly stopped. The rear part lifted, struck the ceiling, and toppled onto the first car. The thin metal railing on that car couldn't withstand the pressure, and it crashed into Marcelo Torres. He got trapped between the seat and the locomotive, but he was alive. In the accident, 10 other people were injured, including Vincent, who lost consciousness multiple times, not fully comprehending what was happening. It was then that medics evacuated other passengers and fought to save Marcelo's life. Only later, when Vincent regained consciousness, did he find out that his friend had died on the spot. Investigators determined that the fatal tragedy occurred because the locomotive's wheels derailed and hit the brakes placed between the tracks. However, the most shocking discovery for the police was that a few weeks before the accident, mechanics had noticed unusual noises and warning signals on the control panel for the ride. These issues occurred on the day of the tragedy, but the operators were hesitant to shut down the popular coaster, fearing the wrath of the park's management. When the Torres family filed a lawsuit against Disneyland, the park took responsibility for the accident and compensated the family. However, Marcelo's death revealed the real cost of disregarding safety rules. Unfortunately, his story is far from being the only one. On Christmas Eve in 1998, the couple, Luan Phi Dawson and Lu Thuy Vuong, took their son and grandson to Disneyland for the first time. The kids were eagerly anticipating an unforgettable day, which it indeed became, but for a completely different reason. The family was waiting for the sailing ship Columbia, a replica of an ancient ship that served as an attraction in the park. It had just completed its previous voyage and was docking again. Employees had just secured the mooring cable when it suddenly broke loose from the ship, taking with it a metal plate that held the rope in place. The plate soared into the air and crashed right onto the heads of Dawson and Vuong in front of their son and grandson. Only when screams erupted on the dock and panic ensued did it become clear that a tragedy had occurred. The couple was immediately rushed to the hospital, but both of them were in critical condition. It was several days before the wife regained consciousness, and when she did, she received devastating news. She learned that her husband had passed away, and she herself had suffered severe head injuries. It took numerous surgeries and nearly a year of rehabilitation just to regain sensitivity in the damaged part of her face. The family of the deceased filed a lawsuit against Disneyland and eventually received a compensation of $25 million. But no matter how much the amusement park tried to mend its wrongdoing, they couldn't bring back Vuong's husband, her normal life, or her undistorted face. all lost due to the park's negligence. The catastrophe happened because the captain had brought the sail down too fast when docking, and nobody on the team reacted. Furthermore, the ship itself was rotten. The mooring cables were made of the wrong material, and they were poorly fastened. So it's unclear what Disneyland values more, its reputation or visitor safety. While Dawson and Vuong teetered between life and death, the park continued to operate as if nothing had happened. They only put up a sign near the Columbia attraction claiming it was temporarily closed due to construction. During this tragedy, a Disneyland employee was also injured. However, she was luckier than some other park workers. In 2009, 21-year-old Austin Wenberg was about to graduate from college and worked at Florida's Walt Disney World. This place is so massive that it even has its own monorail system. The monorail trains operate on 3 routes, one leading to the Epcot theme park, and the other 2 within the Magic Kingdom. Austin Wenberg was working as the conductor on this monorail. He loved his job, even though it sometimes meant working late into the night. On September 5th, his shift happened to be at night. Along with 2 other conductors, they were transporting the last park visitors back to their hotels. Around 2 a.m., Austin's colleague, who was operating the pink train, informed the dispatcher that he was ready to go to the parking area. To do this, they needed to switch the tracks to another line. So the conductor stopped at the track junction, received permission to move forward, and, as usual in such cases, started moving in reverse. But this time, things didn't go as usual. Instead of switching to the other track, the train continued down the same route, and the conductor overlooked that. At the same time, Austin Wenberg's purple train, with 6 passengers on board, was moving toward them. The monorail cars were designed so that the pink train conductor couldn't see what was happening behind. It was only Austin who noticed the oncoming train. He slammed on the brakes and shifted into reverse, but it was too late. The trains collided. Purple train passengers, frightened but unharmed, went out to the platform, while some accident witnesses rushed to Austin's cabin. They knocked and screamed as everyone hoped for a response or movement. However, Austin Wenberg lost his life instantly, crushed between the 2 trains. It turned out that when the control panel operator had to switch tracks for the pink train, he got distracted by other messages. When he returned to the previous task, he merely thought he'd done it, but hadn't. After the investigation, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration fined Disneyland $44,000 for violations found. But do you think this is a significant amount for a resort that hosts over 52 million visitors on average each year? And how much is a life worth? However, Disneyland has always captivated people, and working there has been a dream for many. That dream came true for 18-year-old Debbie Stone back in 1974. The girl had just started university and applied for a summer job at Disneyland. She got a position as a hostess at the park's main attraction at the time, America Sings. This was a unique theater with 6 stages that rotated one by one to the audience. Debbie was supposed to greet the visitors at the start of each show and bid them farewell at the end. On July 8th, she had the evening shift, but before stepping on the stage, she called her parents with astonishing news. She had fallen in love and asked for their permission to get engaged. Her parents supported their daughter, and a joyful Debbie went on stage at America Sings. She was already saying her goodbyes to the audience after another performance when the platforms started shifting, and suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the hall. At first, the audience thought it was part of the show, and only 20 minutes later, after the show ended and Debbie didn't return to her spot, they suspected something was wrong. When the employees and eyewitnesses found the girl, they were horrified. Debbie had been caught between 2 moving walls and succumbed to the injuries. Since then, the attraction underwent several changes, but actors and visitors claimed to hear the voice and even see the ghost of the deceased Debbie. Disneyland has many ghost stories. It might seem like the park doesn't benefit from these reminders of people who died on their premises, but it might not be the case. Legends tend to appear over time once the shock of the tragedy has worn off. Moreover, Disneyland even has a dedicated attraction, the Haunted Mansion, where thousands try to spread the ashes of the deceased in hope that their souls will appear as ghosts. So, who knows? Maybe Disneyland uses the deaths of some visitors to attract others. It seems that this amusement park indeed holds many dark secrets, one of which is connected to Disney's first water park, River Country. In 2001, the season ended as usual, and the visitors were eagerly awaiting the opening of new slides the next year. But that day never came. There was no warning or explanation from Disneyland, so people began searching for answers themselves. Some found them in a story that dated back to 1980. Back then, River Country was exceptionally popular, featuring its own island and a water slide that dropped into a human-made lake. It was a bay that was fenced off from Bay Lake that supplied water to the park through filtering pumps. In August of that season, the water park was bustling with people until dreadful news emerged. An 11-year-old boy had died after a visit to River Country. What was even more shocking was the cause. The child had been infected with life-threatening organisms. It turned out that during his water slide ride at the water park, water with a deadly brain-eating amoeba had entered the boy's nose. In a matter of days, the amoeba destroyed his nervous system and, eventually, his brain. What was even more alarming was the revelation that the waters of Bay Lake, from which River Country drew its water, were teeming with these amoebas, and Disneyland's filtration system let them into their lagoon. However, the park's official representatives responded that such amoebas often breed in freshwater lakes during the summer, so Disneyland couldn't be held responsible for the tragedy. After this incident, River Country operated for many more years, so it's unclear how it's linked to this fatal occurrence. There are rumors that several other people might have perished on the River Country island, but there's no official confirmation. Today, the water park has turned into an eerie wasteland, bearing no resemblance to a place of fun and amusement. Still, there was this spot in Disneyland that quickly earned the title of the most perilous in the park's history. It was a popular attraction called Mission Space, a powerful centrifuge where visitors could experience a simulated trip to Mars. However, its speed and intensity turned out to be so high that during the first years of Mission Space, they had to call an ambulance for its passengers almost 200 times. People felt sick, experienced chest pains and breathing difficulties, and some even lost consciousness. This continued until 2005, when Mission Space led to a fatal incident. A 4-year-old boy was allowed onto the attraction because, according to the rules, he met the height requirement. The centrifuge started as usual, but after the cycle ended, it was apparent that the child had suddenly passed away. The boy had undiagnosed heart problems, and his heart couldn't handle the overly dynamic attraction. As according to the rules, people with heart conditions were prohibited from going on Mission Space, Disneyland was deemed innocent in this tragic incident, and the attraction continued to operate without any changes. That is, until a year later, when a woman lost her life on Mission Space, and the park finally decided to create a tamer version of the attraction without the centrifuge. The horrifying truth is that Disneyland seems to have an endless array of unforeseen ways to ruin its visitors' lives. In 2016, the Graves came to relax at the Disneyland Resort, Grand Floridian. It's a massive complex situated adjacent to the previously mentioned River Country Water Park on the shores of Bay Lake and the Seven Seas Lagoon. The Graves brought their children to Disneyland, 9-year-old Ella and 2-year-old Christian. On that peaceful evening in June, the family was strolling by the water while their 2-year-old son was playing by the shore. Out of the blue, an alligator appeared nearby and dragged the child into the water. The terrified parents couldn't save their son, so they immediately called for rescue. Experts quickly arrived at the lake, but they couldn't locate the boy either. The following day, the Graves hoped for a miracle, but it never happened. They found little Christian's lifeless body on a nearby beach. Grief-stricken, the parents took Disney to court, but the park claimed they couldn't control the presence of alligators on their premises. The only change following the young boy's death was the installation of warning signs, which had never been there before, unlike alligator attacks. Before this fatal tragedy, they had bitten dozens of resort visitors, yet it didn't affect the park's operations. Officially, since its opening in 1955, Disneyland has seen 55 people lose their lives. But this number doesn't include children who died from deadly amoebas, alligator bites, and possibly dozens more, if not hundreds of victims. This is because the park management doesn't acknowledge responsibility for these tragedies. So, do you still want to take a ride on Disneyland's perilous attractions? Or visit their alligator-inhibited resorts? Share your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to our channel, as there are many more dark stories and horrifying secrets in the world that we want to share with you.